Let me turn off the music. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Um, I'm Ted Corbin. I'm the chairperson for the Department of Emergency Medicine here at RUSH, and I'd like to welcome you all to the RUSH BMO Speaker Series, which will be a part of a bi-monthly series going forward. I also like to thank the American Sign Language interpretation for joining us today and will be available throughout the conversation. Today's speaker series will be Advancing Health Equity Through Diversity, Preparedness, and Resilience, a topic very true to RUSH as we are built for that in terms of preparedness and also looking to the future for what we need to do to be prepared for any and every situation. I also would like to welcome our speaker tonight, Dr. Atyia Martin, who's joined by her husband, Roy Martin. We had the pleasure of hearing from earlier today. Pretty riveting, and thank you, Roy, for sharing. Dr. Atyia Martin is the CEO and founder of All Aces Incorporated, an alternative to traditional diversity, equity, and inclusion consulting firms. She is also the executive director of the nonprofit Next Leadership Development, supporting resilience for Black leaders and communities through resources, education, and relationships. Dr. Martin is a certified emergency manager with a wealth of experience applying the principles of racial and social justice with organizations, leaders, and communities. As director of Boston's Office of Public Health Preparedness, she provided strategic direction for Boston public health and healthcare resilience, preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts, including the response to the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings. She also served as Boston's inaugural Chief Resilience Officer, where she developed and implemented the city's first resilience strategy. Dr. Martin is author of the book, We Are the Question Plus the Answer. Additionally, she is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution and a distinguished senior fellow at Northeastern University's Global Resilience Institute. She holds an Associate of Arts in Serbian Croatian from the Defense Language Institute, Bachelor of Science from Excelsior College, a Master of Homeland Security Leadership from the University of Connecticut, and a Doctorate of Law and Policy from Northeastern University. Dr. Martin and her husband, Roy, were born and raised in Boston, where they currently live. They have 5 children, 2 still live at home. But we're very honored and happy to have both of them here with us today. And of course, you know our very own Dr. Rich, who's the director for the RUSH BMO Health Equity Institute. Just a few housekeeping issues. We do have, there are no conflicts of interest for Dr. Martin. And just quickly, just to look over the objectives for this time, there are educational credits associated with that, and we'll show you this in just a second. Define the concept of resilience, recognize the components of a resilience strategy and how such a strategy can advance racial equity, distinguish how public health and healthcare can collaborate to advance resilience and preparedness toward health equity. To obtain your credits, please follow these directions. I'm not going to go in detail about all that, but we will put this back up so folks will have the opportunity to obtain your credits. Thank you, and we look forward to having a wonderful conversation. Just another thing, the format is a little bit different in that it's going to be a conversation. We will listen to the exchange and the dialogue, and then we'll pause for a moment to take some questions from the audience and also from those that might be online. Then we'll resume our conversation, and then we'll also have more time for questions at the end of that. With that, I'm going to ask Dr. Rich to Oh, you have a mic, so it's all good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and welcome everyone. Again, I'm John Rich. I'm the director of the RUSH BMO Institute for Health Equity. And just to let you know, the Institute for Health Equity has as its mission to build, evaluate, and sustain scalable approaches to improving health and eliminating health inequities. And we do that by leveraging the strength of education, research, community clinical practice, policy and advocacy, and community partnerships. And we are really, in our essence, an accelerator, an aggregator, a convener of all of the historical work that Rush has done over its history and that we do in strong partnership with community. And we're committed to inclusion and transparency and conversational gatherings like this. And so I too am really pleased that Dr. Atyia Martin has agreed to join us at Rush. Welcome to Rush, Dr. Martin.
Thank you for having me, sir. I appreciate you.
Likewise, may I call you Atyia?
Of course.
Okay, just ask permission. And so, let's get it started. You have had quite an interesting career. When I look across your resume, you have worked in intelligence, law enforcement, public health preparedness, resilience, diversity, equity, and inclusion, well-being, and many others. Can you talk to us about the arc of your career and what brought you to this place in particular?
Thank you for that question. And the answer is very complicated because I think, as all of you know, in real life, career trajectories are not linear. They're not even kind of clear trajectories. You kind of you say yes to things and then you see where it goes. And so in my career path, I have said yes to a number of things and then jumped into it. So for me, I got into the government through being recruited into the U.S. Air Force. So that's how I got into intelligence and the government. And as I navigated in that space, I realized that I might enjoy it a little bit. So when I came home from the military, I actually worked for the FBI for a while in their field intelligence group. And a lot of the work I did there paralleled what I was doing at the National Security Agency, which is where I was assigned in the military, except it was focused on domestic responsibilities. The transition to local government happened through a consulting organization that asked me to come and help set up the Boston Regional Intelligence Center, was the first locally led intelligence center after Homeland Security money became available, which meant that law enforcement, public health, healthcare, a number of different partners who don't usually work together were going to be working together and sharing information. And it extended beyond traditional Homeland Security. It went into traditional crime and other issues that the community was dealing with. We also, once I finished there, I actually was recruited to go work for the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. And that's how I got into emergency management. I kind of fell into it when I was at the Boston Regional Intelligence Center. An emergency happened in Boston. We had a water crisis. A major water pipe broke. And the Boston Regional Intelligence Center actually coordinated a lot of the information, coordinated resources. And I didn't realize at the time that that's what we were doing, but we were doing emergency management. And so then I began to study emergency management, fell in love with it, and then ended up at the Mayor's Office of Emergency Management. And that's where I got to do all types of not so sexy stuff that nobody else wanted to do, but actually was really the foundation of emergency management. Things like the emergency operation plan for the city of Boston, revamping it and working with all the different city departments, revamping the emergency notification system. What does it mean to communicate with residents in the city of Boston when there are emergencies? How do we get good quality information? How do we take into consideration that folks speak different languages? How do we take into consideration realization that we need partnerships in communities because everyone isn't literate, even in their native language. So all of these different dynamics. Then I spent some time in the Office of Public Health Preparedness, and that's where you land. You started earlier, rather, which is really around what does it look like to do emergency management through a public health lens? Right? How do you do internal public health emergency management, continuity of operations plans? How do we make sure those critical programs we offer as the public health department, the local public health department, are able to actually be sustained when bad things happen? So all of the planning it takes to do that for an 1,100 person agency, on top of being able to coordinate with all of the healthcare infrastructure in Boston. So all of the hospitals, community health centers, long-term care facilities, home health, home care, the whole range of what it takes to support some of the most vulnerable people in our communities. And also partnering with communities, which was critical to a number of our abilities to support emergencies and disasters. And actually, it was in that role that I really fully began to understand the power of collaborating with community. Because when the marathon bombings happened, we started to get a sense of not just what was happening with the institutional partners we were working with, but we actually started to get a sense of what was happening in community and how what we were doing on the institutional, or what we were doing on the institutional side was actually impacting communities. Should I give a concrete example now, or should I continue with the journey? I'm following your lead.
Yeah, sure. Were you going to talk about the Boston Marathon
Yeah,
bombing?
yeah.
We're going to come back to
Okay.
that. That's okay.
That's why I asked. I'm following your lead. I'm following your lead. But at any rate, so I ended my government career by working in the mayor's office. So I was the city's first chief resilience officer. And at the time, actually, the Rockefeller Foundation had created this other nonprofit organization called 100 Resilient Cities. And they identified 100 cities around the world to participate in having a chief resilience officer and then developing resilient strategies for their respective communities. Boston was chosen in one of the rounds, so we became part of the second round of cities that was selected to be a part of the process. And Boston was the first city actually to have a resilient strategy that centered racial and social justice. So we didn't just have a statement in the beginning of the strategy talking about racial and social justice. We actually had initiatives that centered racial justice, and making sure that we were integrating it into the initiatives that we were investing resources in, which was a very, at the time, very radical. And then the other thing that was different about our resilience strategy was we also did a lot of community engagement. We engaged over 15,000 residents across the city of Boston. We had no budget, but we leveraged relationships. We partnered with community-based organizations all across the city. We partnered with all types of private sector institutions. So we talked to community. We also talked to businesses and associations and things like that to get all of the different perspectives and what people were willing to commit to this work. And it was really amazing because nobody really wanted me to do it. They were like, you're doing too much community engagement. Like, why are you doing, we need to wrap this up. And I was like, nope, we need to do more because we're not at that point yet where we fully have reached the broad range of stakeholders that we needed. So it was that experience that really helped me better understand in an even deeper way the power of relationships and how you can create something that doesn't feel so institutional and government-y, um, like our resilience strategy. It doesn't read like a government document. It reads like something regular people put together that names the issues that they're dealing with. So that's kind of the context. In present day, fast forward, I actually have, you mentioned, oh, actually, Dr. Corbin mentioned in the introduction that I run a business called All Aces Inc. So we do racial justice focused diversity, equity, inclusion work in institutions, from Fortune 500 companies to international nonprofits, all the way to small startup businesses and small nonprofits. So we've also done some work with the federal, state, and local government. The other role that I play is with Next Leadership Development as the executive director. And much of our work is in two buckets. One is local, in the work that we do in the city of Boston, greater Boston area, everything from a summer program where young people learn about climate and disaster resilience, as well as storytelling and filmmaking. So by the end of the summer, they've created a short film where they're teaching people about these different issues around what we need to do to address climate change, how it's disproportionately impacting Black communities, as well as what we can actually do about it. And the young people lead that whole process. So that's an example of some of the local programming. And then nationally, we run something called the Black Resilience Network, which is a coalition of Black-led organizations and Black experts who are committed to supporting communities in taking a leadership role in disaster and climate resilience. And I'll stop there for now.
Brilliant. Thank you for taking us on that journey. We're going to come back because I know we're both anxious to hear about your role and your response to the Boston Marathon bombing. But I want to think about the word resilience, and certainly have you tell us, having directed an office of resilience, tell us how you think about that, both in connection to preparedness, but also in connection to the work that you're doing around diversity and inclusion, because I sense it's not a semantic difference, but really fundamental to how you think about it.
Thank you for that. Resilience is complicated. So I have to full disclosure, I am a nerd. Proudly own it, love it, all that good stuff. But it also means that there's a level of nuance to resilience that sometimes gets lost in general conversations about resilience. So I'll lead by saying that oftentimes resilience is a weapon that's used against communities as a way to in some ways thank them for being so strong to suffer through all that they have to suffer through. You know, you're so resilient. But what it misses is all of the elements that go into what it means to being resilient. It's not an individual pursuit. Resilience is not an individual pursuit. Now, there's an individual scale of resilience, but it's not an individual pursuit. And I'm going to come back to that concept. But this idea of resilience really, you'll hear people talk about it from an outcomes perspective, you know, bouncing back. Or sometimes you'll hear people say bouncing forward. And that's one part of resilience, which is the outcomes. What is it that you actually are able to accomplish when all of the pieces that go into resilience are in place? But then there's all the pieces of resilience that need to be in place in order to get to that outcome. That sometimes that gets lost in conversations. So the first piece, when you mentioned preparedness, I want to start there. So preparedness is it's not a complicated topic. It's a hard topic because it has so many levels and layers to it. So the first is a concept called POETI. Anyone ever heard of that acronym, POETI? Oh, one head nod way in the back. I see you. Thank you. So POETI is an emergency management acronym. And it basically says when we talk about a capability, this is what we mean. It means you have plans in place that actually match the reality of the situation that you're in. It means that you have an organizational structure that allows you to actually put that plan into place. It means that you have the equipment and resources you need to put the plan in place using the structure that you have built. It means that you have, I'm going to the T next, it means that you have training. People know how to use the stuff and coordinate in that structure in order to implement the plan. And then the final E actually has two parts to it. One is exercising. You have to practice because you don't know what's going to happen until you practice it. So there's a bunch of assumptions we make in plans. You don't know what's going to happen with your plan until you put it into practice. So exercising is a really powerful way to do that. The other powerful way which is the other E, is evaluation. So something actually happens and you had to use your plan. So COVID-19 happened, right? And we had to use the plans that we had in place. And then you find out that way through intentional evaluation after the incident, what worked, what didn't work, what we need to improve, what we need to sustain and build on to address the issues that we had, that we identified. So in thinking about resilience, preparedness is a foundational part of it. And when you talk about the connection to kind of racial justice, DEI, those pieces, we can't claim resilience for just some people or some institutions or some organizations. We're not resilient if only some people are considered as a part of how we're thinking about resilience. Right? We have to be intentional about being looking at all of the different realities that communities face. So if we're looking at a broader scale of resilience beyond an institution, and we're talking about community resilience, then we have to understand the nuances of different communities and what they're dealing with. What are the challenges that they're facing, and how can we leverage this opportunity that we're in, this moment that we're in around planning and trying to build resilience to address those foundational issues, right? Because the bouncing forward way of thinking about resilience, which is called transformative resilience, really is about recognizing that there's a historical and social context that everything we do sits in, and that we have to actually incorporate that into whatever we do. And when we're measuring progress, we're measuring it in a disaggregated way by the different realities of different communities. So that's probably the most succinct way I can talk about it.
Thank you. Beautifully said. And so let's talk about how that played out in your role as the director of the Office of Public Health Preparedness during the time of the Boston Marathon bombings. What did you learn from that experience?
So I have to say, another full disclosure, I still struggle with talking about the marathon bombings. It was a lot. Like a lot happened between the impact on people, the amount of work that went on behind the scenes, but also the amount of drama and chaos and fighting that went on behind the scenes to pull it all together. So there's a lot of invisible things that were happening behind the scenes. And so when I think about the marathon bombings, I probably say the biggest lesson I learned around resilience is number one in this piece around community and social justice or racial justice. Um, it's okay. Okay. Is relationships. And not just individual relationships, but the relationships that we had built over time that allowed us to do the work we did on for the 2 years after the marathon bombings, that the public health department, the local public health department and its partners were coordinating, not just the immediate response to the marathon bombings, which is what you'll hear most about. That's what the movies are about. But there was 2 years of human services and resources that were coordinated for the survivors. So in the beginning, the Medical Intelligence Center, which is the physical space, the operations center where we coordinated all of the operations, we were in the first 2 weeks coordinating everything from blood, getting blood from other states. So we had the American Red Cross in the Intelligence Center, who was helping us to address the shortages in blood we had in Massachusetts. We were coordinating amputation kits because most hospitals don't do 16 amputations at a time on a single day or over a series of a few days. We were coordinating a lot of information. There was a lot of misinformation that was out there about what was going on. So we were coordinating across all of the healthcare infrastructure to make sure everybody was on the same page. We were also coordinating with the federal government. So we had federal agencies in the Medical Intelligence Center who were bringing in additional resources like the FBI's Office of Victim Assistance, the state Office of Victim Assistance, which usually sits under the Attorney General's office, and really coordinating the resources that were available for the survivors. So we're coordinating kind of the operational healthcare support while we're setting up the infrastructure to support the human needs that folks had. And the hospitals were great partners in that, in being able to know where all of the patients were. We had a very well practiced and planned patient tracking system in place across all of the hospitals. So we were able to know exactly where all the different survivors were, what level of severity they were at. And in the early days, we were still coordinating family reunification rather. So people were looking for their loved ones for days after the marathon bombing. So we had to set up that infrastructure as well. So between the patient tracking piece, which fed into the family reunification, the coordinating resources and supplies for all the healthcare infrastructure. And then you have this human services infrastructure being set up. So we partnered with some private sector partners, a hotel in particular, who was able to give us some space to have a family assistance center, which is a place where the survivor families could go to get information, to get resources. So a lot of times after disasters, you have to fill out lots of different paperwork. If there are 12 agencies, you're filling out 12 different intake forms. And we're like, we're not going to do that. We're going to create one intake form. And so we were able to get everybody to agree on the foundational information that everyone needed from the beginning, have one intake form so that when they went to get their services, they only then had to fill out things that were specific to that particular service they were getting. And that was all collaborated with the hospitals so that they knew what resources were available for the patients that were still hospitalized as well. The other thing I'll share is we also found that because so many resources were being diverted to support the marathon bombings, we had a number of communities who were facing an increase in gun violence in the community. So we had some of our community partners come to us and say, hey, we're struggling. What's going on? How can we get some help? And we had one of our dialysis centers that's not affiliated with the hospital have a shooting outside of the dialysis center. And so we had to coordinate with the dialysis center leadership on getting them resources to put a plan in place because they didn't know what to do when the shooting happened outside. You have dialysis patients, you can't just evacuate them. They're hooked up to machines. So we were able to get them some support from law enforcement experts around those issue areas to help them put a plan together to know what to do next time, which helped to address some of the immediate concerns folks had. And then we also worked with them on getting some of the psychological support that we had, that we were kind of deploying all across the city for different events and for different partners. We also were able to send some of those resources to that particular dialysis center to support their employees because they didn't have a program in place. And we had the resources because of the marathon bombings. So there was no reason to not dual purpose. I know y'all grant writers know about that. Dual purpose, the resources we had to be able to support that particular partner. So it was because of the community partners we were able to start deploying resources beyond the confines of the actual disaster itself to be able to support what was happening beyond it, with actually within community. So it was those relationships that helped us to facilitate that. It was relationships that helped us to get the spaces we needed to support community and the survivors. It was relationships that helped us to coordinate that whole huge response with all of the healthcare infrastructure and public health partners.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing what must still be a lingering and challenging topic to talk about. Thank you for being open to it. In the spirit of a conversation, what we'd like to do is to just open it up for perhaps a question from the folks in the room, if you have one, and a question from the folks online, to take a pause and just think about and hear from you about anything that jumps out that you'd like to ask about. Anyone in the room have a question? Yes. You have a
So in your planning, did you take into or how did you incorporate the individuals with disabilities? Because I know that FEMA had redone their whole idea of you don't send them all to one shelter, you put them all in the community. How did you incorporate that in your plan?
Thank you for bringing that up. For context for everyone else, FEMA is kind of like the federal emergency management folks, but then you have your state and local emergency management on the government side. And then, as you all know, in healthcare, you have your own emergency managers. And so we have to coordinate across all of those folks. And so when we were planning, that early back then was already integrated into it because we took a public health approach. And so we understood the populations of folks that we're working with. So it did back then, it didn't feel like we were doing anything special. But kind of, when you put it in that way, I can see how there are many times where it doesn't happen, especially at the federal level when you're talking about really big disasters. It actually is terrible when you look at really big disasters that where whole communities get destroyed. There are a lot of problems with access for people with disabilities, and not just physical disabilities, sensory disabilities, cognitive disabilities. And so all of that was intentionally a part of our work. In fact, we worked very closely. They're called something different now. I don't remember what they're called, but the used to be called the Office for People with Disabilities, or the Commission for People with Disabilities. And we worked very closely with them, and they had actually a community team, a community advisory group of folks from all different communities within the disabilities community to help inform the work that we were doing. So we were very fortunate in that regard that we hadn't fallen into that trap, but it's a common trap.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience, the virtual audience? Okay. None right now. Okay. Well, I have questions.
Oh boy.
So it's really enlightening. And I have tended, even over my public health career, to think about preparedness as getting ready for something bad that might happen. And we are in a city, like many other cities, that experiences a very high rate of violent injury, firearm homicide that people experience on a day-to-day basis. So if we're waiting for something to happen, people in community are saying to us, something's happening every day. So help us, because I know you've had success in Boston in incorporating these concepts into how do we think about these everyday experiences of trauma, everyday racism as they occur in this context of resilience, and how can we engage with that spirit of connection?
So you're just going to hit me with that heavy question. That's a lot in there. That's a lot.
That's a compound question.
It was a compound question. So what I'll start with is a best practice in emergency management is always to use every opportunity to integrate your plans into how you operate on a regular basis. So what you do for emergency shouldn't be radically different from stuff you do every day. So what's on paper should not require people to go pull out the plan and be like, oh wait, what's that thing again that we do? Like, everyone should always refer back to the plan, but it should be familiar to people. So in addition to training and exercising, it's this idea of leveraging the knowledge and skills and structures and plans to help with day-to-day situations. So one of the things that we were able to do was leverage the infrastructure that emergency management offers. And for folks, I want to be explicit about this because I don't think I have been. Emergency managers are really like conductors. They don't play an instrument. We're not boots on the ground. Right? We are coordinating all of the different folks who do have resources and information to get them to play at least as close to in harmony as possible. That's what we do. So when it comes to how you use that in day-to-day realities, is how can you leverage that infrastructure that works so well to help people coordinate information and resources and deploy them in ways that actually support the needs on the ground. We did a program in partnership with community organizations where we said we have these mental health resources. We have trainings for folks to be able to do kind of mental health interventions that folks had already been through. And so how do we coordinate across partners to be able to have a coordinated response, not just to big disasters, but to community emergencies as defined by communities? And so we learned a lot from that. So from a planning perspective, right, you generally aren't starting from a blank canvas when you're putting working on plans. So when we are working with community partners, we had to start somewhere. So we kind of had a draft framework, and we were like, well, this is how we normally operate. Here are the assumptions. Here's, how we think it would work. And they were like, yeah, none of that's going to work like that. This is how it has to happen. And we were like, okay. So instead of my ego getting in the way, which it has happened sometimes, my ego has gotten in the way, but instead of letting that happen this time, it was more about how do we adjust to make sure this actually works. So we were able to get some Homeland Security dollars, which we had to fight with all the traditional. So we're public health, right? We're fighting with police, fire, EMS folks for money. We were able to get it to be able to fund community-based organizations, not for ourselves, to pass that money through to community-based organizations to be a part of the planning process, to be able to stand up this coordinated response for community-based emergencies. And that allowed us to take that infrastructure that works so well when, there's the world is falling apart, to support communities when incidents happen within a community context.
Thank you. Thank you. So I want to build on that
Yes,
to
sir.
talk about something else that you're very much a part of. And that is because you said when the world is falling apart.
Mm.
So climate change makes us think about the ways in which the world is falling apart. And I know that you have been very vocal and active in thinking about equity as it relates to climate change. Can you talk about that? That wasn't a compound question, by the way.
No, it wasn't.
I was
It
trying to go
wasn't.
straight to
You did. You went straight. You went straight for it. So I think first let's start with climate change, which gets us to climate action, right? So that we're all on the same page. So climate change requires climate action, and all the experts who, are the extra nerdy, like they're nerdier than me, right? So all the nerdiest of nerdiest people have laid out what we need to be doing. So two big buckets of areas. One is mitigation. What is it that we can do to reduce our impact on contributing to climate change, right? So that's the mitigation side. So those are some of the things that RUSH has been doing. And I believe there was the New Wing Bill. What was it called? You all were telling us the story earlier about what is it? How the tower was built, right? Using sustainable materials, that's mitigation, right? Which it sits on this foundation of sustainability. How do we make sure that we're using resources in ways that don't cause long-term harm? Then the other half of climate action is climate adaptation. How do we come to terms with the fact that we've already changed the climate and there are impacts that we are dealing with today that we have to adjust for and accommodate for? So that's everything from how we repair some of the environmental harm. So things like repairing coral reefs, all those types of things. But also people will, this is debate. This is a debate, right? So this is debatable. On the emergency management side, people will say that disaster mitigation doesn't have anything to do with climate action. And so I disagree. So on the disaster mitigation side, what they say is, you're trying to build infrastructure that in essence is trying to reduce the impact of climate change, well, not the impact, but prepare us for the existing impacts from climate change. So with that being a reality, then it is part of adaptation. And so we should be think of it in a more holistic way. So when we think about climate change and a range of actions we can take, there's a whole range of things that we can be doing, including strengthening our emergency management or disaster management strategies. So it's all integrated. When we talk about equity within there, we know that communities of color, Black communities, Latinx communities, and poor communities around the country and actually internationally are disproportionately bearing the burden of climate change, including our indigenous communities, Native American communities. So with that said, we can't take meaningful climate action without factoring those things in, right? So when you asked me about resilience, I said you have to take into account that historical and social context. That's the same thing when it comes to how we need to be thinking about climate change, the actions we take, and how equity works. And if we want to talk about climate resilience, you're also leveraging it as a way, and by it I mean climate action, as a way to address pre-existing issues in communities. So if there's a lot of poverty in a community and we're doing a climate action project in a community, it should be in partnership with the community, not doing stuff to them, not already making decisions for them. It should be in partnership with the community. They should receive some financial benefits from the project. Who are you contracting with as a part of the planning process? Who's catering events? Who's facilitating things? All of that stuff. Where are you renting space from? And when we're doing the implementation, who are you contracting with to do those projects? Right? Who is the workforce that is going to be working on those projects? All of that are opportunities that we oftentimes miss out on to integrate equity and justice into climate change, climate action rather. The last thing I'll say about it is there's a misconception that I hear a lot, especially from folks who are climate experts or disaster experts, which is, well, how do we get communities to care about these issues? Communities care about these issues. They live it every single day. They just don't want to talk to you about it. Right? It's like, but they care about these issues. It is impacting their lives every single day. The air pollution that's in communities, the disproportionate burden of low quality water in communities because of old pipes and other situations. We saw Flint, we saw Jackson. There's a whole layer of impacts people are already experiencing that are at the intersection of climate change and environmental injustices that communities have been dealing with for a very long time. So our ability to respect the community knowledge, the context experts who know about what is happening in their communities and how we can partner with them on bringing that knowledge and making sure they're receiving benefits from the work that we're doing. How we spend our money matters. And so if there's nothing else you do when it comes to this work, where are you spending your money? Who's getting the money for projects? And it's not enough to say that we did a project in a community uh, uh, and we just kind of plopped it in there and therefore the community benefited. No, they didn't. A bunch of people got paid. There were a bunch of contracts. And so yes, on the surface, there's some benefit, but not the deep benefits that there need to be in order to have true racial and social justice as we're implementing climate action.
Thank you. You've you've been visiting some local communities and helping to partner to develop strategies. Can you talk a little bit about perhaps one particular community that comes to mind?
As soon as you said that, the first community that popped in my mind was Mississippi. Um, in March of this year, Mississippi had a huge tornado that actually impacted several counties. 5 of the counties were federally disaster areas as defined by FEMA and then presidentially declared. The amount of devastation that some communities experienced is unimaginable, but also the amount of work that community-based organizations have put in on the ground in the immediate response and in the recovery process, which is still ongoing, right? Because when we talk about recovery, it's that long game. It's years. Most recovery processes, even for a small scale disaster, like if you think about the marathon bombings, that was a small scale, comparatively speaking, to something like tornadoes destroying communities. That took 2 years. There were 2 years of resources that was associated with that. Everything from supporting the survivors all the way to rebuilding infrastructure that was destroyed in the bombings. So if you look at Mississippi and having whole communities destroyed, you're talking about years and years of time it's going to take. And in the immediate aftermath, you saw community-based organizations rallying and supporting community members on the ground. The issue is, as in many instances, community members and community organizations are not a part of the traditional disaster management infrastructure. So they're not a part of the groups who are making decisions in the response phase. And then there's this weird thing that happens in really large disasters where response turns into kind of the short-term recovery to long-term recovery. And in that transition, there are organizations that are referred to as voluntary organizations active in disasters, or VOADs. That's your Red Crosses, Salvation Armies, there's a number of religious institutions that have disaster services, like the Pentecostals, and a bunch of folks who deploy to go into communities after disasters for the response, but also for the recovery. And so there are all of these meetings that are happening that are really about how are we going to distribute resources in communities. And if no community organizations are a part of the conversations about the way those resources are being distributed, then there's always a bunch of unmet needs. People who didn't know, people who missed deadlines because they had no idea that there were resources available or that there were deadlines for the resources. So we spent a lot of time working with community-based organizations on the ground to understand, number one, that this infrastructure was there and there were resources that they could tap into. And then number two, that they had the right to speak up and influence the conversations that were happening. So a concrete example would be, there was one of the Mississippi VOAD meetings that we are a part of where they kind of went through this checklist report out. And one of the items on the checklist was in a week, less than a week, 150 families are going to be they're what they call non-congregate shelter, which just basically means they're in a hotel or a motel or something like that. That their non-congregate shelter was going to expire, and then they just moved on to the next thing, and we were like, time out, back up. So you said 150 families are about to be, not have a place to live. Is there a plan for what's going to happen next? And folks were like, oh, well, can we follow up with you offline to talk about that? And then other folks in the meeting started saying, well, no, we want to know too what's going on with this. Like, what do you mean? What's the plan? So let's just say the state and the VOADs scrambled really fast to put a plan together because there was now suddenly this accountability that hadn't existed before. And representing the Black Resilience Network, we can feign ignorance in a way that sometimes our community partners can't. Right? We can say things sometimes that they can't say, or that will have the type of implications in their context, like Mississippi, that could have huge consequences that could potentially come with physical violence too. Right? You're talking about sometimes very extreme situations people are trying to navigate. So that allows us to help facilitate resources and coordinate. And recently, we convened a session with all of the community-based organizations we had been working with over all of these months since March. This was about 3 weeks ago, where we brought them all together, and we had a philanthropic organization come and listen to the community-based organization share what they had been doing, what needed to change, big picture, like if they were dreaming big, like these are the things that need to change, and what kind of resources that they needed. And out of that meeting, 3 of the organizations received funding. And these are organizations, one in particular, who had not received any funding. It was a Black woman who ran a nonprofit organization and was paying out of her pocket to help people in her community. She ran out of grant money and then she just started paying out of her pocket. She's not a rich woman, but that's how great the need was. So she was able to get some resources to actually support communities. And then she needed support to fill out the grant applications, to put the budget together, all of those things. That's the level of support it takes to really partner with communities, is not to go in with the assumption about what they need, what you should be doing, what you have to be doing, because I could have said that because, I'm an expert. But in reality, they know what they needed. And there's oftentimes these very foundational things that people don't have access to in their communities that they need support on navigating, like, okay, so I got the grant, but I don't know how to put this kind of budget together, or I don't know how to, what they're looking for when they say this language, and coaching them through that process so that they can build the capabilities and capacity that they need to be able to do that in the future for themselves.
Great, thank you. So once again, let's open it up to the folks in the room or online. What questions does this raise, or what does this make you think of in your own work that you'd like to share or ponder?
Hello. I'd like to ask about your recommendations and maybe some experience on using telehealth in these type of situations. We know, as a concrete example, when Ebony and Jet magazine was digital, that was the doom because the customers, my grandmother and aunties, they didn't know how to use the phone to look at Jet and Ebony then. So if you can talk about your thoughts on that, thank you.
Thank you. Ironically, we just actually set up, we meaning the Black Resilience Network, in partnership with one of our expert organizations on mental health. And it's actually a coalition of Black mental health providers from across the country, set up telehealth program in a remote area of California called Weed, California. There's a place in California, y'all, called Weed. Okay. So within Weed, California, there's a neighborhood called Lincoln Heights, which is a predominantly Black community. And I want to tell you how north in Northern California this is. It's closer to the Oregon border than anything else. So it's 4 hours north of Sacramento. And most people are like, Northern California is Sacramento. It's 4 hours north of Sacramento in the mountains. So you're not talking about people that, you're talking about a lot of older adults as well, because in a lot of rural towns, you have a lot of the older adults who are left behind. So we were able to set up the program, but we had to have navigators on the ground who could help the folks who needed access to the services to be able to actually use it. So we didn't just get the clinician, get the find funding to pay the position, to pay the clinician to do the work with community members, but we were able to get funding to actually cover the cost of a person and actually a group of people to support folks when they have these when they have their appointments. So they help them set up the appointments, and then they help them when they go into the space that's been set up just for people to get this kind of care. They help them, they don't have, the elders don't have to figure anything out. Someone's there to do it for them. And so that really, it has to be anytime we do high tech, we have to have low techs. We have to have people who can help them navigate. And we also have to have some low tech options as well when we don't have those navigators. So if there's no navigators available, there has to be a low tech option. I have to be able to pick up the phone. I have to be able to use the technology I know how to use in order to access resources.
Thank you so much, Dr. Martin. Question for you: whenever you organize such bureaucracy where you have state and government and federal government and local and other organizations, how do you navigate the speed and the expeditiousness of the need of the community, which is typically so difficult to navigate in time without a disaster?
Thank you for that question, because that is real, because life is real. And what we found is in most instances, I'll say this, in most instances, we can light a fire under people by helping them focus on where people are being left out. So what we oftentimes will do is we have what's called a situation report, just like an emergency management, operation center would have, and we lay out in writing all of the resources available, all of the unmet needs that have been reported to us, and we bring that to meetings with us. So we're not the only ones holding that information. We actually have a large distribution list that situation report goes out to. So there's external pressure, there's external eyes who are paying attention to what happens with this particular incident. So it gives us a little bit of extra pressure we can put on folks to move a little bit faster without actually having to be as aggressive as we could be and potentially alienate folks. So we leverage a lot of collective power in order to push those buttons. But then there are other times where the reality is it's going to move slow. And so sometimes we have to go over, around, under, through in order to help communities. So an example of that is actually the story I told about Weed, California. Nobody was doing that. So when we started building our relationship with the community over all those months, and then they told us that's what they needed, we were able to help facilitate that without going through the government. Right. So there are times we just have to do things outside of traditional structures. Oftentimes, we have to do things outside of traditional structures to meet the needs, and it requires a level of creativity and in relationships that allow us to kind of tap into other resources outside of that structure.
One more question.
Hi, thank you for your talk today. I have a question related to prioritization. So, would you say that you prioritize emergency situations in communities where they have many emergencies every day? And then from that, when you deem your program or initiative or response to be successful, what does it take for it to be considered successful, and how does that lead into sustainability of those initiatives?
Thank you for that. So the first question was, say it again, sorry. Prioritizing. Thank you. So we honestly don't approach it that way in terms of, all of the incidents happening in the US and, how are we going to prioritize? We base it on relationships we have. So we never just show up in a community saying we're here to help. We build relationships, long-term relationships with people and organizations. And so when something happens in an area where we have relationships, we reach out to folks and we say, hey, saw that this is going on. How are you all doing? Do you need anything? They don't always need something right away. And sometimes they don't know what they need right away. So, but we're always checking in. The other piece is because we're a coalition, it's not just Atyia running around doing stuff. So it's a number of other partners who are involved to help to support different communities. And because they have different needs, there's different partners who then take the lead after our initial touch with the community. So I mentioned one of the mental health providers, All Healers Mental Health Alliance. So they're that expert. And so when that's the need, we hand it off to them and they do their thing so that we can kind of keep moving forward with all the other needs in communities. And some communities, most recently, they needed historic and cultural preservation strategic support because they're rebuilding a whole town and they want to make sure that the culture and the history of the town doesn't get lost in the process. So that allows us to support whatever the priorities of the community are versus us having a prioritized list of things that then lists out the communities. Does that answer your question? Okay, and then the second question, I'm gonna need your help on again. Success, sustainability, success and sustainability. So the number one metric for success for us as a coalition is what did the community think? Because if the community says we really appreciate what you're doing and it's working, then we know we did a good job, right? That's the number one metric. But then when you look at, well, sustainability, one of our key approaches is always about capacity building and relationship building, because we don't want people to need us, right? We want to be able to support them in the immediacy of the thing they need that they might not be an expert in, but we want to do it in a way that helps them be in the lead, in the driver's seat, right? So that if we step away, it can continue. So even with how we approach funding, right, we're looking at who are partners we can work with who have a long-term commitment and will be invested. So the organization I mentioned in Mississippi, there were several organizations who got funding, but the one in particular that I mentioned who had no funding, she's getting funding for 3 years and then a commitment to reassess and to support her with longer term funding. So those are the kind of relationships we try to develop with folks who have resources, so that when we're dealing with communities, it's not a quick hit kind of thing. That we want to be in relationship with organizations and not just have transactional situations. There was one more question right here. Oh, yeah, I saw you start to.
I'm one of the resident trainees right now. And so for somebody just that is just starting off in like public health or trying to get a more populational health approach, what are some tangible ways we can be doing as trainees or, new public health leaders to extend our reach? Because I feel like a lot of what we do as trainees is very individual for that one patient in front of us.
That's a good question, and I don't know that I have a good answer for it. But what I will share with you is one thing that I've learned in doing this work is you find the places where you can have impact and you focus, right? Because you could be all over the place doing a bunch of different things and have no impact. So when it comes to supporting individual patients, bringing it up to a population level, a public health way of thinking about things is really to understand what the data tells us about what's happening in communities and how the work that you're doing can help address some of those challenges as you're interacting with individual patients. Now, if there's some other programming that's available that is doing direct community work at a more population level, then that allows you to, pivot and be able to support that in a more intentional way. But if you're doing direct individual care, you can have huge impact by understanding that racial and social historical context that people are in and respecting where people are coming from. And what I mean by that is not having assumptions about what's best for people, even if you know the answers. Right? Um, there's always context there, and we want to make sure that the patients we're working with, the communities we're working with, who are the context experts, are driving everything. Even if we are the technical content experts, we want to let them be in the driver's seat. And sometimes that, let me reframe, all the time, that means suspending our moral judgments or our values, and focusing on what they need, how they see the world, how they're experiencing the world, to make sure that they're getting what they need and not what we think they need. Is that helpful?
Atyia, thank you so much for a very enlightening conversation. I ask everyone here to please join me in thanking Dr. Atyia Martin for being in this conversation today. And so let me simply say, this is the first in a series. We welcome your feedback. We want to remind you that CMEs are available, and there are some cards in the back, as well as we'll make sure that folks have the information in order to claim those credits. I want to acknowledge that events like this don't happen on their own. So I want to thank all of the folks, DECA, from the Institute, our partners in communications, IT, tech, our captioning partners, our American Sign Language interpreters. Thank you all. And anyone else, all of the folks who have made this really a very wonderful day. Please join us for a reception so that you can interact and build some of those powerful transformative relationships that we heard about in order to make sure that in the day-to-day we're thinking about what makes communities bounce forward and thrive. Thank you, everybody.